Prince slept with the castle cook on a bet what she revealed made him freeze. The church bell tolls over the cold stone walls. In the grand hall, a prince laughs with his noble friends, until their cruel bet sets him on a path of pride and ruin. Down in the kitchens, where firelight flickers and bread is kneaded by weary hands, a cook stands firm against his charm. But one reckless night changes everything. She reveals a truth that chills him to the bone, something he never expected, something that could topple the throne itself. Whispers spread through the court, daggers of scandal hidden in every glance. And as the feast begins, one jealous rival waits to strike, ready to expose the shame before the eyes of the kingdom. Will the prince choose honor or sacrifice her to save his crown? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead in the grand dining hall of the royal castle. There are hundreds of candles casting a warm golden glow across tables laden with the finest silver and china. Nobles in their silk and velvet finery laughed and dined, while servants in plain dark clothing moved silently between them, replacing empty plates and refilling crystal goblets. Prince Adrian reclined in his gilded chair at the high table, his dark hair perfectly styled and his blue velvet coat highlighting his handsome features. He toyed with his wineglass, only half listening to the conversations around him as his eyes wandered lazily across the hall. "I must say," drawled Lord Harrison, a young noble seated to Adrian's right, "the cook has outdone herself tonight. Though I suppose that's the most excitement we can expect from such a plain creature." Several courtiers tittered, and Lady Elizabeth raised her fan to hide her smirk. "Oh yes, that Margaret. So common. I heard she still speaks with a peasant's accent." "Come now," said Adrian, though his lips curved in amusement. "The woman knows her place and serves it well enough." "Speaking of knowing one's place," Lord Harrison said, his eyes glinting with mischief, "we were just discussing your legendary charm with the ladies, Your Highness. Though, I dare say, even your considerable talents have limits." Adrian straightened, pride prickling at his spine. "Limits? I think not. Care to make a wager on that?" Lord Harrison leaned forward, lowering his voice, though his words carried clearly to their immediate companions. "I'd bet 20 gold crowns you couldn't successfully seduce someone so far beneath your station. The cook, for instance." A hush fell over their corner of the table. Adrian's jaw tightened, even as he maintained his careless smile. The very suggestion that he might fail at any conquest stung his ego. "Margaret?" Lady Elizabeth's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Why, she'd probably faint dead away if His Highness so much as winked at her." "Now, that would be a sight," chuckled another courtier. The proud Prince Adrian pursuing a common cook. Adrian's fingers tightened around his wineglass. He could feel the weight of their stares, the silent challenge in their smirks. His reputation, his very pride, demanded an answer. "A week, you say?" He took a long sip of wine, then set his glass down with deliberate care. "Consider your money lost, Harrison. I'll have her eating from my hand in half that time." The nobles exchanged delighted glances, barely containing their glee at this new entertainment. Lord Harrison raised his glass in a mock toast. "To your hunt, Your Highness. May it prove illuminating." Far below the glittering banquet hall, in the warm bustle of the castle kitchens, Margaret stood at a broad wooden table, her capable hands working pastry dough with practiced skill. Wisps of brown hair had escaped her cap, and a light dusting of flour marked her plain dark dress. The air was rich with the scent of dodder, baking bread and roasting meat. "The fruit pies for tomorrow's breakfast still need doing," she told a young kitchen maid, her voice calm and steady despite the evening's endless demands. "Mind you don't let them burn. The nobles get particular about their morning sweets." She worked with quiet efficiency, unaware of the cruel game being plotted above. The kitchen was her domain, a place where she had earned respect through years of honest labor. Here, among the copper pots and stone hearths, she knew exactly who she was and where she stood. As the evening wore on, the wine flowed freely in the banquet hall. Prince Adrian's cheeks grew flushed, his laughter louder, his gestures more expansive, as he entertained his companions with increasingly outrageous boasts about his planned conquest. Finally, as the feast began to wind down, he pushed back from the table and rose somewhat unsteadily to his feet. "I believe," he announced to his snickering friends, "that I shall pay our dear cook a visit. No time like the present to begin, wouldn't you say? Oh, do be careful not to get flour on your fine coat, Your Highness," Lady Elizabeth called after him, causing fresh peals of laughter. Adrian waved off their jests with a confident smirk and strode from the hall, his boots clicking against the marble floors as he made his way toward the servants' stairs. Behind him, the nobles exchanged knowing looks and raised their glasses in silent toast to the entertainment that surely lay ahead. The kitchen was quiet, save for the soft crackle of dying embers in the great hearth and the rhythmic sound of Margaret's hands working dough against the wooden table. Most of the other servants had retired for the night, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the comforting scent of fresh bread. Her sleeves were rolled to her elbows, showing strong forearms dusted with flour. The kitchen's warmth had brought a flush to her cheeks, and loose strands of brown hair curled damply at her temples. Though the hour was late, there was still work to be done, bread to prepare for tomorrow's breakfast, and her mind found peace in the familiar motions. The sound of boots on stone made her pause. At this hour, no servant would walk so boldly. She turned just as Prince Adrian swept into the kitchen, his fine blue coat somewhat askew and his eyes bright with wine. "Good evening, my dear cook," he said, his voice carrying the careful precision of one trying to hide how much they'd drunk. "Working so late?" Such dedication. Margaret dipped into a proper curtsy, though her expression remained neutral. "Your Highness honors the kitchen with his presence. Though I confess, I'm surprised to find you here among the pots and pans. Perhaps I wish to compliment the chef personally on tonight's excellent feast." He moved closer, and Margaret caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with wine. "Or perhaps I simply wanted to see if the rumors about your beauty were true." "Beauty, Your Highness?" Margaret's hands returned to kneading, her movements steady and sure. "I think you'll find little of that here, just flour, yeast, and honest work." Adrian leaned against the table, his smile growing more confident. "You undersell yourself. There's a certain appeal to a woman who knows her craft so well." He reached out to brush a spot of flour from her cheek, but Margaret stepped smoothly aside. "Your Highness is too kind," she said dryly. "Though I suspect your fine coat will suffer from such close proximity to a working kitchen." Rather than take offense, Adrian's eyes sparkled with growing interest. "You have a sharp tongue for a servant, and you have bold manners for a prince," she countered, meeting his gaze directly. "Tell me, Your Highness, does your father know you spend your evenings pursuing kitchen staff? Or is this merely tonight's entertainment?" Adrian straightened, surprised by her directness. "You presume much." "No, Your Highness, I presume exactly what I am, a cook who values her honor more than any title or pretty words." She began shaping the dough into loaves, her movements precise and dignified. "Unlike some, I earn my keep through labor, not idle charm." "Idle?" Adrian's voice held more amusement than anger. "I assure you, I work very hard at being charming." "Yes, I can see how exhausting that must be," Margaret said, her tone desert dry. "All those banquets to attend, all those courtiers to impress. How do you bear such burdens?" To her surprise, Adrian laughed. A genuine sound, not the practiced courtier's chuckle she'd expected. "By God, you really aren't afraid of me, are you?" "Should I be?" She glanced at him sideways. "Does your Highness make a habit of threatening honest servants?" "No threats," he said, moving closer. "Quite the opposite, in fact." Before Margaret could step away, he caught her hand, pulling her toward him. His other hand curved around her waist, and despite herself, she felt her breath catch at his nearness. His lips descended toward hers. For one heartbeat, she almost yielded to the warmth in her blood. Then she placed her flower-covered hand firmly against his chest and pushed him back. "No, Your Highness," she said quietly. "Whatever game you're playing, I'll not be part of it." Adrian stood frozen for a moment, still holding her hand, looking genuinely unsettled by her rejection and perhaps by his own reaction to their near kiss. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Finally, he released her and stepped back, straightening his coat with less than his usual grace. "Good night then, Margaret," he said, his voice oddly formal. I thank you for the conversation." He turned and left the kitchen, his steps less certain than when he'd entered. Margaret watched him go, then turned to stare into the glowing embers of the hearth. "Lord, preserve me from handsome princes and their dangerous smiles," she whispered, crossing herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she returned to her bread-making, and she could still feel the phantom pressure of his touch at her waist. Something told her the prince would prove a grave threat to her peace of mind, and perhaps to her heart as well. The candle's flame cast dancing shadows across the kitchen walls as Margaret sat alone at the worn wooden table. Her fingers moved steadily, pulling needle and thread through worn apron fabric. The castle slept around her, but sleep had been elusive these past nights, her mind troubled by memories of a certain prince's smile. The creak of the kitchen door made her start, though she knew that footstep now. Prince Adrian entered, his manner different from 2 nights before. Gone was the wine-bold swagger, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. "Good evening, Margaret," he said softly, using her name rather than her title. She set down her mending and rose to curtsy. "Your Highness, have you lost your way to your chambers again?" "No." He moved closer, studying her face in the candlelight. "I came seeking you." "Indeed?" She kept her tone neutral, though her heart quickened. "And what does a prince seek from a simple cook at this hour?" "Perhaps understanding." Adrian pulled up a rough wooden stool, a strange sight in his fine clothes. "I've watched you these past days. The way you care for the young servants, sharing extra bread with the hungry ones. How you tend to old Thomas when his joints pain him." Margaret's hands stilled on her mending. "Simple Christian charity, nothing more." "No, it's more than that." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You have a strength I've never seen at court. A purpose. Purpose comes easily when one must work to survive," she said, but without her usual sharpness. "Tell me about it." At her surprised look, he added, "Please. I want to understand." Perhaps it was the lateness of the hour, or the genuine interest in his eyes, but Margaret found herself speaking. She told him of growing up in a farmer's family, of losing her parents to fever, of finding her way to the castle kitchens, of long days and longer nights, of pride in work well done, of faith that carried her through dark times. Adrian listened with unexpected attention. He spoke too, of the weight of expectations, of feeling hollow amid court flattery, of seeking something real. "But you have everything," Margaret said softly. "Do I?" His hand found hers on the table. "I have wealth, title, power. But you have peace, purpose, faith." "Faith can be found by anyone who truly seeks it," she answered, her voice gentle. The candlelight softened his features as he gazed at her. "Perhaps that's what I'm seeking now." When he kissed her this time, there was no wine on his breath, no courtier's artifice in his touch. Margaret knew she should resist, knew the gulf between them was too wide to cross. But loneliness was a heavy burden, and his kiss held a tenderness she hadn't known she craved. His hands were gentle as they drew her close, his whispered words sweet against her skin. The kitchen's familiar warmth wrapped around them as barriers of rank melted away in the darkness. Dawn's first light found them still together, Margaret's head resting on Adrian's shoulder as he held her close. For one brief moment, she allowed herself to savor the peace before reality intruded. Adrian stirred, already thinking of the triumph he would share with his companions. The wager was won, though something uncomfortable stirred in his chest at the thought. But before he could move, Margaret spoke, her voice calm and clear in the gray morning light. "Your Highness, there is something you must know." He tensed at her formal tone. "I carry your child now." She sat up, meeting his eyes directly. "And you have a choice to make. Either you will acknowledge and protect both of us." She paused, her gaze steady. "Or I shall tell the court of the wager that brought you to my bed." Adrian's face went slack with shock, all thoughts of victory crumbling to ash in his mouth. "How did you?" "The servants hear everything, Your Highness." Margaret's dignity was intact, though her face was pale. "Now, what will you choose?" The morning kitchen bustled with its usual rhythm, filled with the clatter of pots and the shouts of servants preparing breakfast. Margaret moved through her duties with practiced efficiency, though her hands trembled slightly as she directed the morning's work. If anyone noticed the shadows beneath her eyes or the pallor of her cheeks, they kept their observations to themselves. In the great hall above, Prince Adrian picked at his breakfast, avoiding the knowing smirks of his companions. Lord Blackwood raised an eyebrow across the table. "Well, Your Highness, we await news of your conquest." Adrian pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. "I grow weary of such games," he said curtly, rising from the table. His friends exchanged puzzled glances as he strode away, his boots echoing on the marble floors. Later that morning, he found himself drawn to the kitchens again. He paused at the door, watching Margaret instruct a young scullery maid in the proper way to knead bread dough. "Gently now, Alice," Margaret said, her hands guiding the girl's movements. "Treat the dough like a living thing. Too rough, and it becomes tough. Too gentle, and it won't rise properly." The girl's face screwed up in concentration. "Like this, Mistress Margaret?" "That's right, dear." Margaret's smile was warm, though it faded when she noticed Adrian's presence. "Your Highness? Did you require something?" "Aye." He straightened, adopting a casual air. "I came to request fresh bread for my chambers." Margaret nodded to a servant. "Thomas, please attend to His Highness's needs." But Adrian didn't move. "I prefer to choose my bread personally." Over the next hour, he lingered in the kitchen, ostensibly examining various loaves while watching Margaret work. She moved with quiet authority, directing servants, checking supplies, tasting broths, all while maintaining perfect composure. When a potboy stumbled, spilling water across the floor, she didn't scold but helped him clean up, showing him how to carry the heavy bucket more safely. Days passed in similar fashion. Adrian found increasingly elaborate excuses to visit the kitchens. He learned the names of the servants, noticed how Margaret stretched the castle's resources to ensure no one went hungry. She treated everyone with the same steady kindness, from the lowest scullery maid to the demanding head steward. One afternoon, he arrived to find Margaret alone, struggling with a heavy sack of flour. Without thinking, he stepped forward to help. "Your fine coat will be ruined," she warned, but allowed him to take the other end of the sack. "It's only cloth," he replied, surprising himself. Soon, he found himself helping with small tasks, carrying water, moving heavy pots, even attempting to knead bread under Margaret's careful instruction. His first loaf was misshapen, but the kitchen staff's carefully hidden smiles held more warmth than mockery. Margaret remained cautious, but her sharp wit emerged in quiet moments. When Adrian complained about the flour dust on his hands, she quipped, "Honest work leaves honest marks, Your Highness." He found himself studying her as she worked, the grace in her movements, the wisdom in her eyes, the quiet dignity that no title could match. She was nothing like the painted courtiers who simpered at his attention. Here was a woman who knew her worth, who earned respect through deeds rather than birth. One evening, as the kitchen quieted and the day's work wound down, Adrian entered to find Margaret alone by the hearth. She was kneading dough for the next morning's bread, her voice lifted in a soft hymn. The familiar words floated through the warm air. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." He stood in the shadows, watching her work. Firelight caught the silver threads in her dark hair, the strength in her capable hands, the peace in her expression as she sang. Something twisted in his chest, regret for the cruel wager that had brought him here. wonder at the treasure he'd found in this humble kitchen, fear of what following his heart might cost. The hymn ended. Margaret continued her work in silence, unaware of his presence or the turmoil in his soul. After a long moment, Adrian turned and left without speaking, his thoughts in chaos, his heart pulling him in directions he'd never expected to go. The autumn wind howled through the castle corridors, carrying the first bite of winter. Prince Adrian had insisted on leading the royal hunt despite the threatening weather, determined to prove his prowess. Now he lay in his chambers, shivering beneath thick blankets, his face flushed with fever. "Your Highness must submit to bleeding," insisted Dr. Reynolds, the chief court physician. His black robes rustled as he removed gleaming surgical tools from his leather case. The imbalance of humors must be corrected. Adrian turned his head away, his voice hoarse. "I'll not have you drain more of my strength when I can barely stand. This stubbornness is most unwise," Dr. Reynolds huffed, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. "The science is quite clear." A quiet knock interrupted him. Margaret stood in the doorway, carrying a wooden tray laden with steaming bowls and cups. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Dr. Reynolds demanded. "The royal chambers are not a place for kitchen staff." "I believe His Highness might benefit from some nourishment," Margaret said calmly, her steady gaze meeting the physician's. "Hot broth for strength, and herbs to ease the fever." "Peasant remedies," the doctor scoffed. "We practice proper medicine here." Adrian pushed himself up on his elbows, his normally perfect hair damp with sweat. "Leave. Doctor, I wish to try the cook's remedies first." "But Your Highness, that will be all." Though weakened, Adrian's tone brooked no argument. The physician gathered his tools with obvious disapproval, muttering about the foolishness of ignoring proper medical advice. When he had gone, Margaret set her tray on the bedside table. "You should not have sent him away," she said, stirring a cup of deep amber liquid. "It will cause talk." "Let them talk." Adrian's attempt at his usual cavalier smile turned into a grimace. "I trust your healing more than their bleeding." Margaret pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. The simple touch brought immediate relief. "This fever must be brought down. Drink this first, honey and herbs, to soothe your throat." Adrian sipped the warm mixture. It tasted of summer meadows and sweetness. Nothing like the bitter medicines the physicians prescribed. "What else have you brought?" "Chicken broth with garlic and thyme, willow bark tea for the fever, and cloths soaked in lavender water to cool your skin." She worked as she spoke, her movements efficient but gentle. Hours passed. Margaret sat beside his bed, replacing the cool cloths when they grew warm, helping him sip broth and healing teas. The fever made Adrian's thoughts drift and spin, but her presence anchored him. "Why do you care for me so?" he asked during a moment of clarity. "After what His voice trailed off, shame mixing with fever's confusion. "Every soul deserves care when suffering," she replied simply. "Even foolish princes who ride out in bad weather." He caught her hand as she reached to adjust his blanket. "The court, the endless games, and gossip, it all feels so empty now. How do you maintain such purpose, such dignity?" Margaret was silent for a long moment, her hand still in his. "I serve God by serving others. There is honor in honest work, in caring for those who depend on me. Perhaps you might find more meaning in your position if you viewed it as service rather than privilege. You make it sound so simple." His voice was barely a whisper. "Not simple, but worthy." Adrian's grip on her hand tightened. "You're the only one, Margaret. The only one who sees past the crown to the man beneath. The only one who speaks truth to me." His eyes, bright with fever, held hers. "So, everyone else sees only what they wish to see: the prince, the heir, the prize. But you, rest now," Margaret said softly, though she didn't withdraw her hand. "Save your strength." Exhausted by emotion and illness, Adrian's eyes drifted closed. His breathing gradually steadied into sleep, his hand still loosely holding hers. In the corridor outside, two ladies in waiting paused as they passed the prince's chambers. They noted the closed door, the absence of the physicians, and most tellingly, the presence of a mere cook at the royal bedside. Most irregular, one whispered behind her fan. The prince spends far too much time in the kitchens these days. Indeed, her companion replied. One might almost think he prefers common company to his own class. Their voices faded as they moved away, but their words lingered in the air like autumn frost, sharp with disapproval and heavy with warning. The great council chamber echoed with heated debate. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, illuminating the oak table where 24 nobles argued about grain taxes. Prince Adrian sat in his customary place, but his thoughts were clearly elsewhere. Your Highness? Lord Chancellor Morton's voice cut through Adrian's reverie. Your opinion on the matter? Adrian straightened in his chair, attempting to focus. I believe we should consider the burden on common folk before raising the tax. Lord Severin's eyebrows rose sharply. Since when does your Highness concern himself with peasant burdens? Since I learned more of their lives, Adrian replied evenly, though his cheeks colored slightly. Whispers rustled around the table like dry leaves. Several council members exchanged meaningful glances. It had not gone unnoticed that the prince's seat at recent balls remained empty, nor that he seemed changed since his illness. Lord Severin's dark eyes narrowed. Once Adrian's companion in revelry, he had watched the prince's recent transformation with growing suspicion. The prince's new interest in common folk threatened Severin's carefully cultivated influence at court. As the council dispersed, Severin drew aside one of the castle's younger servants, a boy named Thomas, who often worked in the kitchens. He pressed a silver coin into the boy's palm. Keep watch on His Highness, Severin murmured. Note where he goes, whom he speaks with. Report all to me. Meanwhile, in the castle kitchens, Margaret stood by the window, reading a letter that had just arrived from the village. Her sister Anne's familiar handwriting brought both comfort and concern. Dearest Margaret, I pray you'll join us for Christmastide this year. Mother speaks often of missing your plum pudding, and the children ask daily when their aunt will visit. The cottage feels empty without your laugh. Your loving sister, Anne. Margaret pressed the letter to her heart, conflict clear on her face. In previous years, she had always spent the holy days with her family. But now, her hand drifted to her stomach, still flat but holding its secret. How could she face them, knowing her condition? The kitchen door opened quietly. Margaret quickly tucked the letter into her apron pocket as Adrian entered. He wore simple clothing, having learned that fine silks drew too much attention below stairs. I missed you, he said softly, moving close but not touching her. Even here, they had to be careful. The council meeting is finished then? Margaret busied herself with the hearth, not meeting his eyes. Yes, I could hardly focus. Margaret. He glanced around to ensure they were alone. I've been thinking. About us. About the future. She stilled, her back to him. Your Highness should not speak of such things. Adrian, he corrected gently, please. When we're alone, I'm just Adrian. He moved closer, his voice dropping lower. I care nothing for their expectations or their rules. I would give up everything, the crown, the castle, all of it, to be with you properly, to make you my wife. Margaret turned sharply, her face pale. You must not say such things. Do you understand what that would mean? The scandal would destroy your family's reputation. The kingdom needs its heir. The kingdom needs a ruler who understands all its people, Adrian insisted. You've taught me that. Through you, I've learned what real nobility means, not birth or titles, but character and wisdom. Stop. Margaret's voice shook. This is madness. You would lose everything. I would gain everything that matters. He reached for her hand. Outside the kitchen window, Thomas crouched in the shadows of the herb garden, watching intently. His eyes widened at the intimate gesture between prince and cook. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face as he slipped away into the gathering dusk. He hurried through the servants' passages until he reached Lord Severin's chambers. The nobleman would be very interested indeed in this development. and Thomas's purse would be heavier for the telling. The great hall blazed with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off jewels and gilded walls. Lords and ladies from every corner of the realm filled the tables, their finest winter velvets and furs adding splashes of deep color to the scene. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats, fresh-baked bread, and mulled wine. In the kitchens below, Margaret directed her staff with calm efficiency, though her heart raced whenever a servant brought word from above. She had heard Prince Adrian would be seated at the high table tonight, alongside visiting nobles. The thought made her hands tremble as she arranged delicate pastries on silver trays. "The boar is ready, mistress," called young Thomas, his face red from the heat of the spits. "Very good," Margaret replied, straightening her apron. "Send it up with the others." She touched her stomach briefly, the slight swelling now noticeable only to her knowing hands. Above in the great hall, Adrian sat stiffly beside his father, barely touching his wine. His eyes kept straying to the servants' entrance, though Margaret never appeared herself. Lord Severin, seated several places down, watched the prince with a calculating smile. As the feast reached its height, servants cleared away the roasted boar and brought forth towers of sugared fruits and pastries. The hall hummed with conversation and laughter. It was then that Lord Severin rose, tapping his crystal goblet for attention. "My lords and ladies," he called, his smooth voice carrying clearly. "I wish to share an amusing tale, a wager made some weeks ago in this very hall." Adrian's head snapped up, his face draining of color. But before he could speak, Severin continued. "Our beloved prince made a most interesting bet that night. He wagered he could seduce a certain kitchen servant." Severin paused, letting shocked whispers ripple through the hall. "A common cook, if you can believe it. And not just seduce her, but make her fall in love with him. Most entertaining, wouldn't you say?" Gasps and titters filled the air. The king's face darkened like a thundercloud. Adrian shot to his feet, his chair scraping back. "You dare not speak of her so," he commanded, but his voice shook. "Her?" Severin's smile widened. "Ah yes, the fair Margaret. Tell us, your highness, did you win your wager? Though perhaps your recent absences from court tell the tale well enough." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Ladies hid behind their fans, whispering furiously. The king rose slowly, his face terrible to behold. "Is this true?" he demanded of his son. "Answer me." At that moment, Margaret herself appeared through the servants' door, carrying a final tray of pastries. She froze as every eye in the hall turned to her. The tray slipped from her fingers, crashing to the floor. "Margaret?" Adrian breathed, starting toward her. "Stay where you are," the king thundered. He turned his fierce gaze on Margaret. "You dare to entrap my son? To rise above your station?" Margaret's face had gone white as snow, but she held herself straight. "I entrapped no one, your majesty." But she could not continue as tears threatened to fall. "Father, please," Adrian pleaded. "The fault is mine. I made that foolish wager. Yes, but what began in dishonor became true and pure. I love her." A collective gasp swept the hall. The king's face purpled with rage. "Silence," he roared. "You will renounce this woman immediately. Or by all that is holy, I shall disinherit you this very night. Choose." Adrian stood frozen, torn between his heart and his duty. His eyes met Margaret's across the hall, filled with anguish. She saw his struggle, saw the weight of the crown crushing him. And, in that moment, she made her choice. Without a word, Margaret turned and fled the hall. Her footsteps echoed on the stone as she ran, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She did not stop until she reached the empty courtyard, where snow was beginning to fall. The cold air bit at her face as she sank onto a stone bench, her sobs echoing off the castle walls. Above, she could still hear the commotion from the feast, but it seemed distant now, like a dream fading at dawn. As her tears slowly subsided, Margaret's resolve hardened like frost. She could not be the cause of Adrian losing his birthright, his future. The kingdom needed him more than she did. There was only one choice. She must leave, disappear into the night before he could try to find her. Perhaps somewhere far away, she could build a quiet life for herself and her child. She would leave before dawn, she decided, while the castle still slept. It would break her heart, but she would do what duty demanded, dine, just as she had always done. The first pale light of dawn crept over the castle walls, painting the frost-covered courtyard in shades of silver. Margaret stood in her small chamber above the kitchens, folding her spare apron with trembling hands. Her few belongings lay spread across her narrow bed: 2 worn dresses, a prayer book, a small pouch of coins saved over years of service, and her mother's silver cross. The castle slept deeply after the feast, its halls silent save for the occasional crackle of dying torches. Margaret tied her bundle with steady fingers, though her heart ached with each simple knot. She had already written a brief note for Sarah, her kitchen assistant, with instructions for the day's bread and guidance for managing the stores. "'Tis better this way," she whispered to herself, touching her stomach gently. The morning sickness had begun to fade, but the weight of her secret felt heavier than ever. She pulled on her warmest cloak, a sturdy wool garment that had served her well through many winters. The familiar weight settled around her shoulders like armor against the biting cold that awaited outside. With one last look at the chamber that had been her home for so many years, Margaret lifted her bundle and slipped into the shadowed corridor. The kitchen, usually alive with warmth and activity, stood dark and quiet. Ashes from last night's fires dusted the stone floor, and the copper pots hung silent on their hooks. Margaret paused by the great hearth where she and Adrian had shared so many quiet moments. Her fingers brushed the rough stone, remembering. "God keep you safe, my prince," she murmured, then squared her shoulders and moved toward the servants' gate. The heavy iron key turned smoothly in the lock. She had oiled it the night before to ensure silence. Beyond the gate, the road stretched away toward the village, frost glittering on every blade of grass. Margaret pulled her cloak tighter and began walking, her sturdy boots crunching on the frozen ground. Hours later, in his royal chambers, Prince Adrian paced like a caged lion. 2 guards stood outside his doors, placed there by his father's command to ensure he did not further disgrace the crown. The prince's fine clothes from the feast lay crumpled on a chair, his hair disheveled from a sleepless night. When a servant brought his morning meal, Adrian immediately demanded news from the kitchens. The boy's hesitant response sent him reeling. "Gone?" Adrian gripped the servant's shoulders. "What do you mean, gone?" "The cook, Your Highness, she wasn't at her post this morning." Sarah found a note. Adrian released the boy and strode to the window, his hands clenched into fists. "Margaret," he breathed, watching the road that led away from the castle. She would go to her sister, he was certain. But with his father's guards watching his every move, a plan formed in his mind. He turned back to the trembling servant. "Fetch Thomas from the stables. Tell him I require his presence," discreetly. When the young stablehand arrived, Adrian pressed a heavy purse into his hands. "My finest horse, saddled and waiting by the east postern gate in 10 minutes. Can you manage it?" Thomas's eyes widened at the weight of the coins. "Aye, Your Highness. But the guards, leave them to me." Soon after, Adrian stood at his chamber door, calling out in apparent distress. "Guards, quickly, fetch the physician. I fear the wine from last night." The moment both guards hurried away, he slipped out and ran through the castle's lesser-used corridors. His heart pounded not from the effort, but from fear of delay. How many hours had Margaret been gone? At the postern gate, Thomas waited with a saddled stallion. Adrian swung himself up, throwing his winter cloak around his shoulders. "If anyone asks, I've seen nothing, Your Highness," Thomas assured him with a quick bow. Adrian spurred the horse forward, the cold wind whipping at his face as he galloped down the road. His cloak streamed behind him like a banner as he urged the stallion faster, desperate to catch up with Margaret before she disappeared from his life forever. On the muddy road ahead, Margaret walked steadily onward. Her bundle grew heavier with each step, but she refused to rest. The village was still hours away, and she needed to put as much distance between herself and the castle as possible before her absence was discovered. A grand carriage rattled past, splashing mud onto her skirts. Margaret barely noticed, lost in prayer as her hand rested protectively over her belly. "Lord, watch over this innocent child," she whispered. "Grant us both the strength for what lies ahead." The morning sun climbed higher, but provided little warmth against the winter chill. Still, Margaret pressed on, each step taking her further from the life she had known and the love she had lost. The winter sun hung high over the village marketplace, casting weak light on the bustling scene below. Farmers arranged their winter cabbages and root vegetables on wooden stands, while children darted between market stalls, their laughter rising above the general din of commerce. Margaret stood beside her sister Anne near the village square, her shoulders tense as they discussed her prospects. "The tavern always needs a good cook," Anne said softly, squeezing Margaret's hand. "Though 'tis not as grand as castle kitchens." Margaret forced a brave smile. "Any honest work will do, sister. I must think of the future now." The familiar sounds of the marketplace suddenly shifted as the thunder of hoofbeats echoed through the square. People scattered as a magnificent horse galloped into view, its rider's cloak billowing behind him. Margaret's heart stopped as she recognized Prince Adrian. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the frozen ground with purpose. The crowd fell silent as he strode toward Margaret, his face set with determination. To everyone's astonishment, he dropped to one knee before her in the middle of the marketplace. "Margaret," he declared, his voice carrying across the hushed square, "I come not because of any wager, but because my heart led me here. I love you, and I ask you to be my betrothed." Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. Margaret trembled, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes upon them. "Your Highness," she whispered, "think of the scandal, the crown. True nobility lies in virtue, not birth," Adrian proclaimed, taking her hand. "You have shown me more nobility in your kitchen than I have seen in a lifetime at court. I choose you, whatever the cost." The marketplace erupted with cheers. Farmers' wives wiped tears from their eyes, and even the children stopped their games to watch. Several noble ladies who had been shopping for lace stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and outrage, but they could do nothing to quiet the joyous approval of the common folk. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at Adrian's earnest face. Her heart thundered in her chest as she squeezed his hand. "Yes," she breathed, barely audible above the crowd's enthusiasm. Adrian rose to his feet, never letting go of her hand. "Before you all," he announced, "I declare this woman my future wife." As if heaven itself approved, the bells of the church tower began to ring, their clear tones pealing out across the village square. Snow drifted softly outside the village church, coating the windowsills in white as nobles and peasants filled the pews together. The reading of the banns echoed through the hushed sanctuary, declaring the intent of Prince Adrian to wed Margaret, former cook of the royal castle. Children peeked over the backs of wooden benches while lords and ladies shifted uncomfortably in their fine clothes. After days of heated council meetings and growing public support, the king had finally relented. Standing before his advisors, he had declared that Adrian would retain his right of succession provided Margaret proved herself worthy of the crown. The announcement sent ripples through the kingdom, but none could deny the swell of approval from the common folk. When the wedding day arrived, the church glowed with hundreds of beeswax candles. Margaret wore a gown of cream-colored wool, simple yet elegant, adorned only with sprigs of winter rosemary. Adrian, dressed more plainly than usual, watched her approach the altar with genuine reverence in his eyes. "You have taught me true nobility," he whispered as she reached his side. Their vows rang clear and true through the sacred space. When the priest pronounced them wed, the villagers burst into spontaneous song, their voices rising to the rafters while noble guests looked on in wonder. The return to the castle marked the beginning of transformation. Servants who had once known Margaret as their fellow worker now curtsied deeply, calling her "Your Highness" with bright smiles. Though some nobles whispered behind their hands, They could not ignore how the people cheered for their new princess. In the great hall, Adrian stood before the assembled court. "With my bride's wisdom to guide me," he declared, "I vow to rule with justice for all our people, high-born and low alike." That evening, in the quiet of the royal chamber, Margaret and Adrian knelt together before the crackling hearth. Their prayers mingled in the firelit air, his voice strong, hers steady with the faith that had sustained her through years of service. The flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls as they prayed, two hearts united not just in marriage but in shared purpose. Through their union, the castle itself seemed to soften, its proud towers and cold halls warming with the promise of change brought by a cook's dignity and a prince's redemption. Thanks for taking a moment to feel with me. If this story reminded you of what matters, hit subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow, continuing our story.